All right, let's pick up with part two here by talking about Manifest Destiny and Texas independence. There is a part one if you haven't yet watched that, so check that out first. All right, so Texas, right? Texas was part of Mexico, and Mexico was fairly recently independent from Spain at this point. It became independent in 1828. And as we discussed in the previous video, James Polk, the 11th president of the U.S., was a major proponent of westward expansion and manifest destiny. So after Mexican independence, the Mexican government actually welcomed Americans to trade along the Santa Fe Trail. Some of the earliest Texans in history are Stephen Austin, who we see here to the right. His support of the impresario system, which we'll talk about in a little bit, was key to the development of Texas. And we'll also talk about Sam Houston's role, in particular, with Texas independence. So, in any case, what you see is that a number of different American traders end up coming into Texas. This is actually a subsequent map, so let's just go back here. Right, what we're going to see is that over time, American trappers and traders start to assimilate into the local Texas population, and there were multi ethnic settlements that spring up in Texas. They were a number of different types of settlements. There was the presidio, which was more of an agricultural type settlement, a mission, which had more of a religious purpose, and a ranch, right, which was more, it was agricultural, but more in terms of animal domestication, right? The Mexican authorities, rather, actually, to a certain extent, were welcoming American settlers into Texas because they wanted to have sort of a buffer zone between the Mexican heartland and the United States, and they thought that if this were a sparsely populated area by sort of these rural yeoman farmers, that it would not be problematic, right? And so this promotion of American emigration to Texas is problematic because Mexico actually abolished slavery with the adaptation of its constitution in 1824. But many Americans who go to Texas are from places like Mississippi and Louisiana, and they own slaves. So when they migrate to Texas, they want to bring their slaves with them. Right, and they also want to bring the cotton industry with them as well. One of the reasons why many people move west to places like Texas is because land is not cheap anymore, and they want to purchase it. They want to purchase land more effectively. They want to be able to expand the cotton industry, and of course, the way in which they envision that happening is by continuing to have their source of free labor, right? Eventually, what we're going to see is that the Americans who migrate to Texas start to outnumber the the Texans themselves, right? Texans who were of mestizo descent, right? They were both Mexican, Spanish, and Native American in descent. So as Americans, so people of European descent, start to outnumber them, this is going to cause considerable tension. So by 1828, the Mexican government restricted immigration into Texas. Again, the Constitution already outlawed slavery in Mexico, but the 1828 uh, legislation actually formally restricts slavery or formally abolishes slavery in Texas itself. And it also raises taxes in Texas to make it less desirable for Americans to move there. And so as a result of that, war breaks out, right? This is the Texas Independence War. And so Americans get involved in this war because they want to preserve the slave holding culture and they want to claim Texas as their own, right? But some Texans had a different plan, right? Texas was not originally just absorbed immediately into the United States. In 1836, the Americans actually at first suffer a devastating defeat at the Alamo, which was ultimately a fort that was bombarded by Santa Anna, the Mexican general, and his troops, and not a single American at the Alamo survived that attack, right? But as a response to the Alamo, there was sort of this quest for vengeance from the American perspective. And so the old saying, remember the Alamo, was sort of a nod to that, right? So, in remembrance of the Alamo, ultimately the Americans, under the military leadership of Sam Houston, who we see here, defeats Santa Anna. They hold him hostage, right? And in exchange, Texas ends up winning its independence from Mexico. And at first, Texas is its own independent republic, right? So the Republic of Texas is born in 1836, and Texas itself is not admitted to the U.S. until 1845. So there is a 9 year period of independent Texas, hence the phrase the Lone Star State, and many other associations with sort of that independence or rogue nature of the state of Texas. In any case, we talked about this quite a bit, so forgive me for not actually having these slides up, but again, the impresarios, right? Or rather, Stephen Austin was one of these impresarios. They were basically people who recruited American settlers to Texas. Again, most of these settlers were slaveholders, which was one of the reasons why there was so much tension. And then again, we highlighted the war for Texas. Here is the Alamo itself. It is now a pretty predominant tourist attraction in Texas. And then moving on to the Republic of Texas and then the annexation of Texas into the United States. So, as we previously established, right, James Polk, the president of the U.S. from 1845 to, where's my brain? Oh gosh, I forget when he dies offhand. My apologies. But anyway, Polk's election in 1844 is a significant victory for Manifest Destiny, right? And the reason why that matters is because Polk, when he runs for president in 1844, one of his arguable promises to his voters is that if he is elected, that Texas will become a state, right? And ultimately, this does happen, right? So, Texas is one of Polk's major pet projects, that along with the Oregon controversy. So ultimately, the Texas question was sort of avoided until 1844, but because James Polk pressed the issue so much in the election, once he is elected, he sees this sort of as a mandate to move forward with his plan to annex Texas, which ultimately happens. We will see that there's going to be a border dispute between Mexico and the United States after that, which will ultimately result in war between Texas and Mexico, right? And in fact, I feel like that's a good place to stop. Let's talk a little bit more about the Overland Trail next, and then we'll talk about the Mexican American War in a future video. So, stay tuned, and thanks.